Hello and welcome back. Northstar here with another solo Singularity Let's Play. Chance to talk about stuff. It's something that was rather on the nose since the current exploration is mind machine and basically AI with a lot of nonsense trying to glamorize generative AIs and stuff later in the tree here. Um, I swear that the guy who makes this game makes it specifically to push propaganda for this or that corporation or government cause. I wouldn't be surprised if he's secretly getting grants, but even assuming that that's not the case, he could just be a libertarian fanboy of capitalism and everything that exists that the powerful are doing in this world to screw everyone else. It's entirely feasible. He's a true believer in this bullshit. Um, but what is on the nose here uh, is just learning about I'm sure some of you have heard of ChatGPT and all that. The controversy it created, and some of you may not know though about the human rights violations and the hyper-exploitation of labor that went into that. Apparently, in order to generate the models, I'm sure some of you may be aware that they have to be trained on data sets, and the data that's fed into the large language models and such has to be labeled ahead of time. And this isn't just like a couple highly paid researchers doing this spare time. No, they were relying on thousands of hyper-exploited laborers in Africa and Venezuela paid less than $2 an hour. And a lot of the data they were having to label was the most offensive content. So people were being asked to label bestiality, child abuse, self-harm, things like that. And not given adequate access to counseling and therapy services. The company would promise it, but then repeatedly deny requests for those people to get access to such services. I'm pretty sure that the only reason the company even claimed to people that offered such thing is to get new hires and try and put a good face on it to the media. People being only able to rarely get group therapy sessions and not any denied any one-on-one counseling, and being diagnosed with PTSD, some of them unable to work, basically becoming disabled because of this work they did. Which, as someone disabled with long COVID, I can sympathize a little bit with. There's some elements of long COVID's effects on the brain that are kind of similar to PTSD. Um, and something I have to live with. And these people are getting it from a job they did, which in countries like Venezuela, which was ruined by U.S. sanctions, the economy there, um, or Kenya, where U.S. and Soviet competition for dominance and coup making and stuff has led to the area being very poor and under the thumb of U.S. imperialism. And then they're being asked to do this horrible work, paid very low wages, and shoot up, spat out by the system when they were unable to work further. There have been a series of investigative reporting articles on this. One in Time magazine. I forget what the other two were, but the Time magazine is a good source. I recommend finding the Time article on it. And that was for OpenAI and ChatGPT and Facebook algorithms, actually, if I remember correctly. Um, there's a whole shadow economy of people being asked to do all sorts of gig work at very low wages in the third world who help make our high tech wonders possible that we think are so great. Many people don't realize there's some very exploited people who make it possible because capitalism sucks. Almost want to go back and yell at the people who in the Cold War, is this the world you wanted? But of course, the people of power, this is the world they wanted. And like the United States, the ruling class and ordinary people were bamboozled by propaganda. There's a great book called The Triumph of Evil. It talks about, well, essentially how the wrong side won the Cold War and how the United States, after propping up countless far right dictators, Nazi types, and such in the third world, and assassinating people and funding coups and using the IMF as a tool to push countries into essentially debt slavery, where they're hyper indebted and they have to let the IMF dictate their internal policies in order to keep getting IMF loans in order to even be able to keep the government afloat. And of course, the policies aren't really designed. The changes the IMF demands are not designed for the well-being of the country. They're designed for the well-being of foreign corporations in that country. So that's the world we've ended up with, and I don't know. I've been meaning to go and read it thoroughly. I'm aware of some of the things it says, but excerpts and stuff like that isn't the same as reading a whole book. I've read Against Empire and Black Shirts and Reds by Michael Prenti, and those are both excellent works. I highly recommend. Triumph of Evil, The Triumph of Evil, is on my reading list, and I suggest you folks add it to yours. Because a world where people are being spoiled like this with no end in sight, it's not getting better. Indeed, what we're going through now is the third worldization of the United States, with inflation and the cost of living often outpacing wage growth. It's tempting to say, well, wages have gone up a little over time, but often such measures don't adequately account for the rise in the consumer price index. They don't adequately account for the increasing costs of college and healthcare and things like that. A better measure maybe look at what's happened to the net wealth of Americans. Wealth is a better indication of inequality than income often, because there's all sorts of ways you can fuck with income where you pay someone more, but then you jack up their rent, etc. So they're not actually better off. And when you look at the wealth of Americans, the middle class is collapsing and slowly losing wealth. The poor are getting poorer and the rich are getting richer. That is very much a system that is becoming third world, that is becoming extremely unequal. And without the Soviet Union to present a actually viable rival to U.S. power around the world anymore, there's no one to stop the billionaires from ruling the world, unless ordinary people rise up and say this has to stop. This oligarchy, this corruption, this purchasing of politicians, and these paying people $2 an hour, it all has to stop. And you're not going to be able to permanently stop under capitalism. You're going to have to do democratic socialism. You're going to have to nationalize the largest companies and seize the assets of the billionaires and make it illegal to bribe politicians to make these air quote campaign politicians. They're really just legalized bribery. You got to do finance reform. You've got to nationalize the biggest companies, and you've got to create government policies that systematically advantage and incentivize the creation of workers' cooperatives to even slowly turn the smaller companies into something that's socialized. Otherwise, concentration of wealth will destroy any democracy in the long run. And that's exactly what we're seeing in our world. It's reductionist and stupid and ignorant when people try and say, oh, the Soviet Union wasn't great, therefore socialism doesn't work. Well, first of all, by measures like economic growth, the Soviet Union outperformed the United States in relative GDP growth, because money makes money. If you have a giant pile of money, you can add more to your GDP in absolute terms if your GDP is already huge each year. But in percentage growth rate, they outperformed the US and they outperformed other capitalist countries at a similar level of economic development. In income equality and wealth equality, there's this thing called the Gini index, which tries to add together income inequality, wealth inequality. It tries to take all these things, and there's other, or maybe the Gini was the simplified one, but there's several measures of inequality in society that have been compiled, and they variously put the Soviet Union as the most equal country that ever existed, or the second most. The number one in the ones where one country exceeds them being Sweden. Yes, Sweden, social democracy, so a capitalist country, tried to tame capitalism. The problem with social democracy is not that it doesn't work, because it does work while it exists. The problem with social democracy is that it's unstable, that it only works until the rich manage to find ways to undermine it and destroy it and turn it into neoliberal capitalism, which doesn't work. Because there's still billionaires in social democracies, they will still find ways to destroy democracy in the end. And that's what's slowly starting to happen in Sweden now, where the rich are undermining the social democracy there. And they will eventually make it just as bad as the US. Give it 150 years or something, it'll be just like the US is today. It's slow, but it is pretty much guaranteed to happen. There's only way that's going to change, the same way it's going to change in like the United States, is only if there's a peaceful, hopefully, but only if there's a socialist revolution. You cannot. This could be something on a scale of the civil rights movement or a new constitutional convention or whatever. It could end up being another civil war if the rich crack down on and throw in jail their opponents and such, and maybe even declare an election illegitimate that they lost. There's ways they could force it into violence, but even if it's non-violent, it's going to require a permanent rewriting of laws in ways that are large and difficult to undo for the rich, and the rich need to have their assets taken. Otherwise, that money is the source of their power. And it was essentially stolen from workers. They love to claim that's a violation of the human rights. No, what was a violation of the human rights was how they stole that money. Employment is one thing, but billionaires aren't so much employers as they are hyper large investors. They didn't get their money. Millionaires may get money from running a company. Billionaires get money from stock market, from investing stocks, sometimes in their own companies, but it's from holding lots of capital and from capital gains and from playing the tax system so they don't pay their fair share in taxes. That's how you get to be a billionaire. And it's so most of that wealth is essentially stolen. It's stolen from people who actually do the labor. It may require a reimagining of the legal system and what constitutes rightfully earned money versus theft. But just because something is written in the law doesn't mean it's just. The law is not the definition of justice. If any of you have studied sociology or psychology, there's what's known as Piaget's, what is it? It was Piaget, right? That is this theory of moral paradigms is the best way I can put it. Basically, that I should remember this because I was a pre-med trying to become a physician. I had to learn this in MCAT. Yes, it's in there. It sometimes shows up in MCAT questions, and I knew my stuff very well. But with my long COVID, I have memory issues. But basically, it's a theory of different levels of morality we go through as we're developing as human beings, with childlike morality being very simplistic and very selfish. And a lot of people reach the point of thinking that right and wrong can be defined by what's in the law, and they don't go any further. A lot of adults plateau at that level. But higher levels of moral reasoning, there's two. One that a number of intellectuals tend to reach, people who are deeper thinkers, and another that very, very few people in any generation ever reach, the highest level. But the second highest is more what we're talking about, getting to the point where you start to realize that what's written in the law isn't necessarily morality, that right and wrong transcend the law. The law attempts to reflect these things, but it can be flawed. It's a product of history, circumstance, and power. Those with power write the law, and they write the law in ways that advantage them. And so sometimes the law needs to be revised. Sometimes the law needs to be torn up and rewritten because it's written by those with all the money and the power. It's, written by aristocrats in the 1800s. It's not even, most of these legal precedents come from a very long time ago. And then there's an even higher level of reasoning that gets even more towards absolute morality and general principles of morality. It's difficult to reason in. it's important to know in the theory that sometimes people can reason on one level, but not primarily exist on it. I'd say a number of very smart people, and I would have counted myself among them when I was, before long COVID, I was tested as a genius from a kid, and I was extremely educated and very interested in history and kind of these philosophical right and wrong issues. Sometimes I could reason at this level, but I couldn't live there, and almost very few people can. Is the sixth level of morality. I think is the seventh, the highest. Uh, and that gets even more to what to the core of this same sort of relationship with right and wrong, general principles of morality. But anyways, it's important theories. It's not perfect. Remember, it was just created by a sociologist from observing and studying and collecting data on how people approach morality. And it's especially weird when you have one level that almost no one exists on. How could he get enough examples to even create the model for that? The point being, though, no, the law is not right if it says that the wealth that the billionaires have is their human right. No, that's not their human right. That is, maybe the law says is, but the law is wrong there. They stole that money. They stole it from all the people who actually generated that wealth with their labor over generations sometimes. Often they worked with governments, with the kleptocratic politicians to manipulate the market and the economy in ways that benefited the politicians. In exchange, the politicians gave them favors. Often they established monopolies, so they weren't even charging what would be considered free market rates for things. And I said stock market, speculation, investments. There's a lot of tools they used to get there, but they ultimately it all came from the workers. So, yeah, nationalization and seizure of the largest assets, or at least a accumulated wealth tax that's high. That's how you save democracy. Otherwise, the rich would just keep getting richer no matter what you do, and they'll eventually destroy all democracy and turn everything into a kind of like a fascist state, which is unfortunately where we seem to be headed in our world. It's gotten to the point where even supposedly Biden, in his farewell address, warned that the United States was turning into oligarchy. Biden, who probably was part and parcel of making the system the way it was, but it was too much even for him to turn a blind eye to anymore. That's saying something. Kind of like Eisenhower's farewell address, where he warned us about the military-industrial complex. He was part of that problem when he was president, but then he warned us about when he left. It seems Biden did something similar. Well, anyways, I wish you folks all the best. Take care of each other. Be kind to yourselves. And may always find a guiding star to lead you home. Adieu.